class, welcome to week 10. So if you hear some heavy breathing, that is a dog that I'm watching. Just wanted to give you a heads up so you guys don't think that I'm a really heavy breather. But anyways, this week we will be talking about how you can make this paper that you're all working on an argument, what the elements of an argumentative paper are, and developing a thesis, and how to make sure that you develop a strong thesis based on the structure of your argument. So without further ado, let's get right into it. And as we've discussed many times, writing is like a conversation. So in this particular assignment, we're going to be doing all of the things listed here. So your annotations were how you listened to the conversation, and then you expand on that conversation with your research and by developing your own opinion on the issue, and then you contribute to that conversation through this assignment by targeting a specific stakeholder. So this research argument is inherently a persuasive argument. So you're not just informing your audience, you are trying to get them to take some kind of action. So when we're talking about your stakeholder, if they are already in opposition to the issue that you're talking about, then you're trying to get them to be less resistant. If they're undecided, then you want them to bring them over to your side of this issue. You want them to agree with you. And if they're already in agreement, then you don't want them to be idle. You want them to take some kind of action. So think about how this applies to your own topic and your stakeholder audience that you've chosen. So let's talk about stakeholders. As we've mentioned before, a stakeholder is an individual or group or organization that has a stake in the issue. So remember that a single stakeholder group does not have different perspectives on this issue. They share values, needs, and an understanding of the issue, which is what makes it easier to direct your argument towards that specific audience, because they're a group that shares the same feelings about things, so you can talk about those things in the same way. So think about what stakeholder group needs to hear your perspective and why. Is it because they have the most influence and can make the changes that are necessary? Is it because they're the ones that are the most impacted by the issue and are most likely to take action? So as I've mentioned before, some people, choose abortion as a topic, or maybe they choose vegetarianism. Who would you write that to? Who needs to hear it, or who can take action? These are the kinds of things you want to think about. And again, I cannot say this enough, this is not an informative essay. You're writing to persuade a stakeholder to think, believe differently about the issue that you're talking about, not just to understand the issue, but to influence some kind of change. So the context for this assignment, we have your issue. It's being addressed to a specific stakeholder in an academic context, and it needs to be appropriate for your stakeholder and an academic audience. Your paper does. So make sure that the language reflects that. So your argument should support your perspective. It needs to convince a specific audience to believe, feel, understand, or act differently on this issue. And it must understand your audience's current perspective. It needs to know how to appeal to that perspective. So what are your audience's values and needs and beliefs about this issue currently? And how can you change that? And then you also need to make sure that you're using audience appeals like logos, ethos, and pathos effectively in order to appeal to that audience. So now let's talk about the foundation of an argument, your thesis. Your thesis is the building block of an argument. So it's what everything else is structured around. So the reasons and evidence fall just below the thesis, and they help develop your thesis. So ultimately, they're serving the function of proving that your thesis is correct. And then with all of that, you need to make sure that you're nodding to your audience's values and needs, and that this is a discussion in response to their perspective. So with that, you need to keep in mind that you have to include a counter argument which considers that other perspective and acknowledges it with research and says, this is a valid opinion, and there's this research that backs it up, but here's why I still think that my perspective is the correct perspective and the perspective that you should have on this too. So the first step is making a claim or a thesis statement. So your argument is going to revolve around this thesis, and you need to find reasons that will support it. It's a thesis-driven argument. So the thesis is at the center of everything. The issue should be decided this way because, and you would put your thesis there, because of A, B, and C, and those are your reasons. So that's the kind of sense that it should make. And it needs to answer your inquiry questions, while also persuading your reader to accept your claim and be less resistant of your claim, or to take some kind of action based on that claim. All claims have to be debatable, guys. You can't say something like killing is bad. Everybody knows killing is bad. This isn't a topic that people are debating on. It's pretty clear killing is bad. So think about things that can be debated. Another thing that really isn't debatable is, we should all have a healthy diet. It's not debatable. So keep that in mind. There's a few different types of claims. There's a claim of cause and effect, claim of value, and a claim of solution or policy. So let's start with cause and effect. These claims argue for a direct cause and effect relationship between two things, and the relationship is debatable. So something that's not debatable is a student's grades in high school affect admission to college. Well, duh, that's a fact. It's not really something you can argue. So a debatable claim would be testing in schools improves the quality of education. And you see that this is cause and effect because of testing causes an improvement in the quality of education. So now let's talk about claims of value. Typically, these state or imply that something is either good or bad. They lead to evaluative arguments or assessing the worth. So whether the thing is good or bad is the debatable portion. So something that's not debatable, I said this earlier, murdering people is unethical. That's not debatable. So let's look at something that is. Capital punishment is unethical. So this is a hot topic issue, right? People have all kinds of opinions on this. And this is a claim of value because we're saying that capital punishment is bad. Or another example is not providing government fully funded higher education is an injustice to the citizens of the country. We're saying that it's a bad thing to not do. When talking about claims of solution or policy, these call for an enactment of some kind of policy or law or rule. So whether that should go in effect is the part that is debatable. So first you have to demonstrate what the problem is and then provide the solution, kind of like the stakeholder proposal that you guys did. And these often include the word should. So something that's not debatable is that drunk drivers should be punished. We can all pretty much agree that it's bad to drive drunk. No one argues that they shouldn't be punished. But what is debatable is universities should implement stricter standards for admission. So notice that this is calling for some kind of implementation of a policy, which is what makes it a claim about policy or solution. Here's some more examples that we can look at. A question is, what are the impacts of graduate teaching assistants being allowed to teach classes instead of instructors or professors? What are the benefits or drawbacks? So these are the inquiry questions that a student started with. And then think about how you would answer that right now and why it's important. And I hope you guys are thinking about this when you do your own research. And we come up with that GTAs provide a valuable service that allows instructors and professors to focus on teaching and research. They're often more accessible, but there are some departments that should offer training in various forms because they don't currently have enough support for GTAs. So this is your tentative thesis statement or claim. You can play with the wording of your thesis to create your claims. So these are what they would look like if you were to propose these claims as a cause and effect, or as a value policy, or as a solution or policy claim. And I want you to take a look at how all of these are different, how they vary based on the kind of claim that you want to build. So the reason we're actually going to skip this because, we're not in person, so we can't do this activity, but I do want you guys to think about what kinds of claims you would work best with your topic and your audience. And maybe write down a few examples of each of these types of claims so that you can see which one you like the best and which one you think will be the strongest and easiest for you to build off of. And now let's talk about how you can support your argument now that we've established the importance of your thesis and the different kinds of thesis that you can have. So Logos appeals are, again, this is review, but they are how you can show that your claim is true based on logic. So these are built with reasons and evidence. This is a research argument, so you'll be doing lots and lots of research, but you want to make sure that you have all of these different types of evidence. So firsthand observations, examples from personal experience, statistics, facts, and quotations from your research, the results of field research such as interviews, etc. You want to make sure you're backing up your claims. Your choices of evidence should reflect your purpose, your audience, and your context. So keep all of those things in mind as you're choosing what kinds of evidence you want to include. The writer needs to provide connections and explanations and interpretations to make the evidence meaningful. So keep in mind that you don't just want to drop a quotation in there, you want to support it and develop it with the meaning. You need to make that connection for your reader so that they understand why this piece of evidence that you included here is relevant. So here's an example. We have a claim or thesis that sums up your argument in a sentence or two, and this is just an example of the structure of what this should look like. You have your reasons and then the evidence that supports those reasons. Hopefully you have multiple kinds of evidence, and then you have your other reason and evidence that supports that as well. So here's another example of how you can build your argument structure. And you may start off with just an idea, like sometimes it snows a lot in Fort Collins and usually CSU stays open. They hardly ever close campus. And after some research, you decide that you think CSU should close more often when it snows. So how might you support this thesis to an audience that is the CSU administration? How can you convince them that it's a good idea to close? So think about the kinds of reasons that you would use to support that thesis. What would appeal to the CSU administration? What kinds of evidence could you look for to back up your claims? And you won't be working with a partner, but I do hope that you'll take some time to think about this and think about how you would build an argument like this. This is exactly what you're going to be doing in A3. So I just want to get you guys in the habit of thinking about that audience and how you can support things in relation to your audience. So when you're creating support for your claim, you, as I mentioned earlier, want to consider your audience, their values, their expectations, their assumptions about the issue, and how these all relate to your claim. So make sure you identify 3 to 6 reasons to support your claim. The more resistant your audience is, the more support you'll need. And for each reason, consider the types of evidence that you need in order to illustrate and support this reason. So